maybe 7:04 and some odd seconds. Anyway, the council has just completed an executive session, and prior to that executive session, we did go ahead and approve the agenda as published. The next item the council will be addressing is a special recognition, and for that, I do want to hand it over to the interim city manager for just a minute.
Sure. Before we get to our special recognition, I just wanted to mention to anyone that might be watching the meeting at home tonight, we do have a technology issue with our cameras. We'll have limited movement tonight, so the cameras will likely stay panned onto the council. We will have full audio, and I apologize for the inconvenience.
Okay, so for that, the special recognition that we have this evening is one of sadness and sobriety, and it's on the passing of Kirk Robinson. After some discussion, we did feel that it would be best and most appropriate for the words to be coming from our Fire Chief Heitman and Police Chief Ed Holmes. So with that, I hand it over to you two.
Good evening, Council. For the record, Steve Heitman, Fire Chief. It is with a heavy heart that I share the sad news of the passing of our friend, a longtime Mercer Island resident and hometown hero, Kirk Robinson. We received word Friday that his valiant fight against cancer came to an end. As many of you know, Kirk grew up on Mercer Island, son of Gary and Lori Robinson. Kirk attended Mercer Island schools and began his career as an auxiliary firefighter for the Mercer Island Fire Department. I actually met Kirk Robinson for the first time on my very first day with the Mercer Island Fire Department, and he was an amazing individual. He was warm, he was kind. It was a great way to start my career. He later joined Mercer Island Marine Patrol as a tech and went on to serve as a firefighter in Bothell, where he was promoted to lieutenant. When he wasn't serving the community in his capacity as a first responder, K-Rob, as he was known, served in other ways. He volunteered with Mercer Island Football Club, European spelling on that, Mercer Island Presbyterian Church, and at Island Park Elementary School. He coached soccer and baseball and managed safety for the Round the Rock paddleboard race. He staffed the Mercer Island Youth and Family Services Christmas tree lot. Most recently, he was appointed to serve on the inaugural Parks and Recreation Commission, devoting time to the parks and trails he and his sons enjoyed. Leading by example, he led teams of Mercer Island students to Mexico to help build home for those in need, passing along the shared value of helping others. Then there are all the other things Kirk did quietly to make the world a better place, like hosting an inclusive Thanksgiving soccer game called Turkey Day Football, playing music for competitors running the Mercer Island Half Marathon, or helping clean up after Hurricane Katrina and volunteering at Ground Zero after 9/11. To say Kirk was a special person would be an understatement. He was a devoted father to sons Levi and Gavin, husband to wife Jessie, son to Gary and Lori, and a friend beloved by all who knew him. When Mercer Island Police and Fire learned of Kirk's passing, they turned out to honor him and show support to his family. As the Robinson family made the journey from Seattle to the funeral home in Bellevue Friday morning, MIPD Sergeant Jim Robarge was part of the motorcade. Then Mercer Island Marine Patrol joined the procession, pacing the hearse across the I-90 bridge. As the motorcade continued, passing through Mercer Island on I-90, our fire and police departments joined together, waiting on the side of the freeway. As they stood atop the fire engines with their emergency lights on, both firefighters and police saluted to Kirk one more time as he went by. Kirk selflessly shared his life with anyone lucky enough to meet him. His friend Nicola shared this with his family and friends and gave us permission to share it now. Kirk made this world better. There is no doubt about that. He was passionate about helping others and to celebrate people helping people. He spent his life serving others. Please go help someone today. Buy them a coffee. Take a neighbor's trash can in. Rake some leaves. Donate to somewhere that you care about. Make a difference in a life. Hug someone. The baton has been passed. It's up to us now. We'll take it from here. The outpouring of support from the community has been incredible. So many of you have reached out to the city wanting to honor Kirk. We are honored that you thought about the community as Kirk would have done, and will be in touch with those who have reached out with ideas. Jesse, Gavin, Levi, Lori, and Gary. Kirk's legacy lives on in you, in the people he helped. Know that our hearts are with you. Thank you.
I don't know of any council members who would like to say anything, but I would suggest in advance of that we just have a moment of silence and remembrance. Thank you. Council members, to our public safety officers, if you would like to say anything, please come forward. Council members? Wendy?
I'll just start by saying I was lucky enough to meet Kirk when he was taking my kids to Mexico, the MIPC trip. And he was larger than life, and he just shone brighter than the sun. It was a pleasure and a privilege to know him in a brief way that I did. And I know he touched my kids much more than I did, because on the trip he was just incredible for all the kids that were there and all the chaperones that were there. And he'd been doing it for 27 years, if I'm not mistaken. So that's a good chunk of his life devoted to serving his community, serving our kids, and serving his church. So I'm just humbled and grateful to have had the privilege to meet him and know him just a little bit.
So,
I'll echo that sentiment, Kirk. He was an amazing guy. He lived a life of service. He was my neighbor. We went to school with his brother. My wife went to school with him. We've been very close, and it's just super sad news to hear for the family and for the neighbors, for the friends. So many. He touched so many lives, and he lived such a life of service. It's inspiring to hear the chief's words about how we can take it from here and carry the torch. And Kirk would be happy to hear that. Just sorry for his loss.
and I would just add in my deepest sympathies and sorrow with the family, and I take to heart the message that was shared, and I hope everybody too does, not only tonight or tomorrow, but in the weeks, months, and years to come. And thank you for coming, and thank you for also showing your respect for a valued partner, a valued islander, and I think someone who touched many people in the region, and potentially the world. So, thank you. With that, our next item on the agenda is appearances. And this is the opportunity for anyone to speak to the City Council on any item. All remarks will be addressed to the Council as a whole and not to individual council members or staff members. Any person making personal and pertinent slanderous remarks, etc., may be requested to leave the meeting. The Council, during this period, cannot accept comments on any campaign-related matters, meaning elections for individual offices or ballot propositions, except under certain circumstances where consideration of a ballot measure is on the council agenda. There is no such measure on this evening's agenda, so please do refrain. When it's your turn to address the council, please be sure to speak audibly into the podium microphone, state your name for the record, and limit your comments to 3 minutes. So is there anybody here who'd like to address council? Has anybody signed up?
Yes, Mayor, we have Mr. Daniel Thompson, Olivia Lippens, and Ashley Hay.
You're welcome.
Good evening. My name is Daniel Thompson. I reside at 7265 North Mercer Way. I emailed you 5 procedural things that I think are important for the council to consider. Right now we have the 2020 council planning session scheduled for February 2020. I think that's too late. In the past, what has happened is it's been April, early April, before we have the final council agenda. I think knowing next year that obviously the general and capital budgets, and probably the bus intercept, maybe protecting the parks to tee up the levee, are going to be the main issues. I really think that council should think about scheduling early, or middle January to get going on the agenda. The second issue I mentioned is it's almost impossible for a citizen, let alone a council member, to get a 200-page agenda on Thursday at 5 o'clock for a council meeting. I think we need to extend that a week. You know, look, there's always going to be another council meeting. The citizens should be getting the agenda packets at least a week or more before, and I think so should the council. The third thing I was looking at is I don't know how the council is going to address the general fund budget next year without the actual budget numbers after 2018, the estimates and the discrepancy with the numbers. You can't have the actual numbers come out in May of 2019 and have the council go through a very, very contentious process of cutting expenditures that weren't necessary. Somehow that's going to have to be expedited, because I think most of us kind of suspect that we're going to see in 2019 what we saw in 2018. The next issue I have is I think the council has to better control its agenda. Right now, land use is just killing the council. The 2018 surveyor basically said the out-of-scale residential development and lack of transparency was going to hurt a levy in 2018. We just went through the CFZ process. The council decided not to pursue the affordable housing grant, which I thought was wise, because I thought Bruce had a great point. What you're learning is you remand these things to the planning commission and the council loses control. And you could just sit back and you watch these flames begin. So, you know, what I'd like you to do is think about Bob Medved's appeal to the Growth Management Hearing Board. What he was arguing, and the city stipulated too, is there needs to be an annual docket for development regulations like there is for comprehensive plan amendments. The council should be taking these up once a year rather than, you know, piecemeal all throughout the year, these procedural code cleanups, which I think are really substantive changes in the end. I think that would really help the council, because you could clear your agenda and you can look at it. Now, I want to make one point. With our appeal on the CFZ for concurrent development regulations, I hope that everyone here understood that the person who benefits the most from concurrent development regulations is the council. You have a couple, 3 comprehensive plan amendments you adopted in 2018. Take the cottage housing. I could file tomorrow a failure to challenge act at the board, and you would spend all of 2020 in a contentious debate drafting development regulations without an applicant or a location, and that would derail your agenda. So I want you to think about those 2 things, the concurrent development regulations and the development regulation docket. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. My name is Olivia Lippens, for the record, Mercer Island resident, and one of many accidental activists who have answered the inconvenient call to work hard to convince our leadership to represent Mercer Island interests, listen to their constituency that will not accept the bus depot that's planned for our island. Some folks are confused by the bus depot proposal. This opposition is not about light rail in the least. We welcome a stop on light rail. What is of concern to overwhelming number of Mercer Island citizens is that we will be the last stop for all westbound buses. For those who are unaware, this means that every single one of those thousands of westbound commuters on those buses will be pushed off onto Mercer Island daily, whether those commuters want to stop here or not. These hardworking folks will spill onto our sidewalks and streets with no infrastructure to support them, no planned public safety measures, and not even a place to use a restroom for 14,000 people daily. Over the past 3 months, the voices from this community have been consistent, clear, and growing daily, all urging no massive bus depot for Mercer Island. This position spans families of all ideologies, local businesses, downtown property owners, elderly residents, longtime residents, and newcomers. And among everyone we have encountered, it's nearly universal position. We don't want it. The bus depot will change how we operate in our neighborhoods and our parks. There is a continual reference to the $10 million settlement, but that money is already earmarked, and specifically how it can be spent. How many times can we spend $10 million? It's already spent. So are all of the many parents like myself who have prioritized mental health counselors in the schools to be the top priority for funds to take a seat while we drum up some tax dollars to pay for mitigation and implementation of a bus dump that has nothing to do with our own residents? And it's wholly inconsistent with the goals, values, and appetite of this community. I'd now like to take a quick moment to address specifically Sound Transit and Metro leadership, who by their own PR engine's admission have a hearty problem with crime at their stations and on their buses that have required new programs and exponential leaps in safety expenditures. The crime of sexual misconduct has been a problem hiding in plain sight in our systems, says Deputy General Manager of Metro, Terry White, in an April story that ran on Cairo. In fact, Metro buses implemented a report at Stop It public safety outreach, which registered 178 reports of sexual assaults. These security concerns are echoed by the leadership of these transit authorities, and their messages to this community is clear. If there are additional security measures needed and more police for 14,000 people, then Mercer Island citizens will pay. Sound Transit recently announced their own security concerns after a rash of additional crime. They boosted their expenditures by $34.4 million. And the CEO said that nationally, crime is linked to the communities in which they operate, which pushes it off to the communities. There's no crime here, so this is going to be a brilliant litmus test when this bus dump comes to our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Victor Rashis and I live at 8323 Southeast 82nd Street. I'm the lesser-known co-owner of Island Books, a local business. My family's had a continuous presence on Mercer Island for nearly 50 years. Since 1971, we've lived here, we've grown up here, we've raised our family here, and we run a local business here. I'm here tonight, both as an island resident and an island business owner, to express my opposition to the bus intercept. In recent council meetings, I've listened to the island community express their unanimous opposition to the bus intercept. For the purposes of brevity, I won't rehash the arguments that have already been made. Suffice it to say, we agree. We did want to provide you with our perspective on the bus intercept as local business owners. We've recently heard arguments made by a few people that the bus intercept will increase the vitality of town center. We strongly disagree. First, we believe that the idea of depositing thousands of additional commuters in our town center will somehow benefit the businesses in the town center represents wishful or magical thinking. We've spent the last 4 years observing commuter behavior from our store windows. Every weekday, commuters park in front of our store on the street. At the end of the day, we watch these commuters walk back to their cars and drive away. These commuters don't shop at our store or the other businesses around us because they're on their way to somewhere else. They're on their way home after a day of work. For those of you on the council or in the audience that commute to work daily, I would ask how many of you stop and interrupt your commute in the middle of your commute and walk multiple blocks to shop in a community that is not yours and not your own. Second, with the increase in the number of people that a bus intercept would bring to our town center, we expect that our costs of doing business in the town center will increase. I'll remind the council that Island Books has the dubious distinction of being one of the few businesses on Mercer Island that has been the victim of a violent crime, an armed robbery in the summer of 2017. With a bus intercept, we anticipate we will need to increase our staff in the evenings during the slowest part of our day, not because of increased business, but because of safety and not wanting to leave our female employees alone in the store at night. We also expect higher losses due to shoplifting. We anticipate our shoplifting problem to get much worse with the increase in the number of non-island residents in the town center and the quick and easy access on and off the island. Finally, over the previous few months of council meetings, we've listened to proposed mitigation plans for the bus intercept. However, these plans focus on crime, traffic, and infrastructure impact around the transit station. Who will mitigate the effects for local businesses? Unfortunately, it looks like local businesses will have to absorb those costs themselves. So in summary, we don't see much upside. We see plenty of downside for a bus intercept on Mercer Island. We expect to see higher costs for our business without the corresponding increase in revenues or other benefits for our business. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Good evening, it's me again. I'm Ashley Hay. I've lived on Mercer Island for 12 years. I'm here for the 4th time in 3 months because island residents are still wondering and still very concerned about what is happening with the bus intercept. It's now been 7 months since Metro sat right here and presented 3 unacceptable, configurations for a bus intercept. All of the configurations violate the 2017 settlement agreement that was signed between Mercer Island and Sound Transit. Acknowledging that a configuration cannot be implemented without King County's approval, the parties were to work collaboratively to obtain concurrence. Yet it doesn't look like Metro and Sound Transit are very interested in collaboration at this point. Metro has demanded a number of refinements which would negatively impact Mercer Island, and they state that these refinements are required in order to concur. That doesn't sound very collaborative to me. Metro's assessment of the settlement agreement is that it is unworkable and has multiple shortcomings. Then why would Sound Transit sign it? The fact that Metro operates buses on behalf of Sound Transit makes this list of refinements even more unacceptable. Deviations of this magnitude should have been considered at the time of the agreement by Sound Transit, who signed it. Even to a stay-at-home mom who typically stays out of these types of issues, I can smell the baloney a mile away. Moms are very good at detecting that smell. The only collaboration I see going on here is between two regional partners who have a common goal of taking advantage of our small community. This situation has gotten out of hand. It's been too long. I'm getting tired of showing up here. I'm tired of asking somebody to advocate for us. Tonight I'm actually sick and tired. I have laryngitis. But I'm here. I'm not going away until this issue is resolved because island residents deserve representation, and I'm going to keep asking for it. We deserve collaboration. We deserve for the 2017 settlement agreement to be upheld, and we deserve fair representation. So I'll ask again that you keep Mercer Island's interests at the forefront of this situation. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thanks. Ira Appleman. I'm worried that Sound Transit and our regional partners are running the council and staff. And I have a somewhat different perspective because I'm the only person in the room who was involved since 1998 when this all began. And at first, we dealt with the park and ride. And I told the council that was sitting in your chairs that we should fight for Mercer Island only spots. And the council didn't do it. And staff came back and just spewed out the story from Sound Transit, which is it was illegal, that their money couldn't be used for Mercer Island only spots. And then later on we found out when they were trying to get us to put Park and Ride on Kite Hill, that then they said, oh no, we could give you it after 6 or 7 years when Bellevue opens up, when the Bellevue Park and Ride opens up, then we could give you the Park and Ride on Kite Hill. Well, how's that possible? We knew that that was wrong and that they could use money to give us spots, but they didn't want to do it. The process that we went through from 2000 to 2005 amended the Memorandum Agreement, which was the 1976 agreement that allowed us to use the center lanes on the bridge. Well, when we amended it, we were told that our regional partners, that is Sound Transit, Bellevue, King County, Seattle, would take care of us. That was the whole thing. We were joining in on this because they would take care of us. And so we gave up our rights on the bridge, but they were going to take care of our mobility issues. And what happened? With the Sound Transit Agreement, they're not taking care of us at all. They're out of the picture. They gave us what, from my point of view, was a small amount of money, and then they exited. You should have used your moral authority, and still use your moral authority, to hold them to that promise, that they would all stay with us to deal with our mobility issues. The third issue in which we, I think, are being run by Sound Transit is the bus intercept. This was never part of the issue. I mean, I was involved, very heavily involved, since 1998, and the bus intercept was never the issue. The reason why Sound Transit said we needed to be kicked out of the HOV lanes is because the buses needed to perform a circle. They needed to go into Seattle and then come out of Seattle. And as a result, they needed less crowding within those HOV lanes. Now they're not doing that at all. There is no circuit. They're stopping on Mercer Island. and that bus dump is going to be to our big, big disadvantage. So I think we need a city council to stand up and represent Mercer Island, not our regional partners. I'm for cooperation with our regional partners. They're representing themselves. Our council should represent us. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else here for public appearances? Great. Welcome.
Hello, I'm Beth Christopherson. I've spoken a couple times. I was gone for a few months, so I'm happy to be back advocating for our community. I don't have anything officially prepared tonight. I applaud Ashley Hay for her wonderful delivery filled with facts and information. Tonight, I just will keep it brief and say that I'm continue to be disgusted by the lack of action of the council, to the point where I'm shaking. You guys have heard about the bus intercept from a lot of people and the previous council members' inability to do anything positive with that. And frankly, I'm sure I'll get called a lot of nasty names for this, but I'm sick of walking in my community and seeing homeless people. I'm sick of not wanting to take my kids for a walk because there's needles in the park, and I've seen this firsthand. In the last 3 days on Mercer Island, a place that we all live, I've seen a rampant homelessness. Today at 6:49 in the morning, there's 2 homeless people walking directly across from Walgreens, one pushing a stroller full of crap and another pushing a shopping cart, likely from QFC. Every day, I work at Pixie Hill Preschool. Every day, the same homeless person walks by. A tiny school filled with island residents who are 3 and 4 and 5 years old. Just because you're homeless doesn't make you a bad person, I know that. I've fed homeless people, I've donated to homelessness, but it's in our community, and just because you're homeless doesn't mean you're bad, but it also doesn't mean that you're just your average person. There's violent crime that comes with homelessness, and whether or not you want to tie it into the bus intercept or statistics or what have you, I just plead for the council to hear me. I just want you guys to help us. By us, I mean other community members who are also concerned about it. So I'm hopeful that the city council and the mayor will get their act together and do something to support island residents instead of just whatever your backhanded interests are. So hopefully things will change, but in the meantime, thank you for at least listening.
Thank you. Is there anyone else for public appearances? All right, hearing none, public appearances is closed. The next item of business is the consent calendar. And the consent calendar contains payroll, AB 5587. And is there a motion to approve as presented?
Second.
First and second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, consent calendar is approved. We have one item of regular business this evening, and that is Agenda Bill 5611, the pilot project for short-term commuter parking. And sorry, so also included in consent, I believe, I'm looking at the city clerk, have noted that there was the proclamation for Arbor Day. Okay, great. I don't think that changes anybody's opinion, probably. All right, but for AB 5611, we have, excuse me, Zach Hubner, interim recreation director, manager.
Review.
Technical difficulties?
Technical difficulties.
Okay.
All right, good evening, council. My name is Zach Hubner, I'm your interim recreation manager, and today I present to you Agenda Bill 5611, which is the follow-up for our pilot project in short-term parking. As you will recall, I came to council on September 3rd to give an update on our pilot project for introducing a paid parking app at the BP Arco property, Sunset Highway Southeast cul-de-sac, as well as the boat launch. There were several questions and follow-ups that council had asked at that meeting, and I'm here today to present that. On September 3rd, I did present some findings about the BP Arco property, which included additional costs, permitting costs, and delayed implementation for the BP Arco property to be included in the pilot project. It was determined that the BP Arco property would no longer be included. However, there was significant interest. I believe Deputy Mayor Neese brought the point of Sunset Highway and why not include the West End cul-de-sac. So I have some information today on Sunset Highway with the inclusion of the West End cul-de-sac, the middle portion of Sunset Highway and the East End cul-de-sac, as well as some ordinance amendments and the cost analysis of the project. As you'll see in this slide, the Sunset Highway current restrictions, basically we are looking at 3 different areas on Sunset Highway. On the left-hand side of that diagram, you'll see that the West End cul-de-sac, which is adjacent to the Aljoya building, is town center permit parking, Monday through Friday, 7 to 9 a.m. The red lines are denoted as no parking. There is the middle portion, which is depicted as that yellow line. There's 7 stalls there, and that is 2-hour limit parking. And then the faint blue line on the right-hand side is the East End cul-de-sac, and that is our 4-hour limit, 8:30 to 5:30 p.m., except Sundays and holidays. We're looking at the West End cul-de-sac here, and I've just given a couple of aerial shots of satellite images on the West End for a variety of reasons. One, for showing the council how the cars line up there. There is no painted parking stalls on the West End cul-de-sac, so as you'll see in the top diagram, there's 10 vehicles parked there in a somewhat orderly fashion. Goes down to 15 vehicles in that middle picture, and then 17 vehicles, which is pretty darn crammed at the bottom. But so when I did the cost analysis, I did use 15 cars just as an average. That seems to be what that area is being utilized for. It's heavily utilized, most likely for Aljoya residents and other town center parking. The middle portion of Sunset Highway, which is adjacent to 77 Central apartment buildings, is 2-hour limit, 8:30 to 5:30. And to go back to the West End, it is permit parking within our city code. All of the project sites on Sunset Highway would have to be amended if council were to include this in the pilot project. It's 7 vehicles. Again, it's painted for 7 vehicles, and it's utilized heavily. And then the East End cul-de-sac, which we spent a lot of time on. Again, the satellite images just show the configuration of that lot. It's different than the West End in that people are parking bumper to bumper instead of pull-in parking straight ahead. Again, it's 4-hour limit, and it's time-restricted parking within our city code.
Benson?
Can we go back to the West End? I just have a question. So, do you have any idea how many of those, on a given day, I mean, I know it's an average, how many people are actually parking there with their permits? I mean, how many commuter parkers are there?
I can't speak to how many permit parkers are there. It is designated as that. When I've done my brief analysis on the site, I'm just taking random samples of satellite imagery.
Just a reminder, this is only permit parking in the mornings.
Yeah.
So you're
Just
saying
about
it's
2 hours.
permitted between 7 and 9, otherwise it's open?
Correct.
I understand that. So from 7 to 9, we don't know how many people are parking, commuter parkers in general? I mean, is it being used for what it was intended?
I could jump in. Ed Holmes, your police chief. So yes, our police support officer does actively enforce this area. So though I've not talked to her specifically about this for tonight's meeting, I know that she does actively enforce. So I would believe that those would be permitted at least for those hours, or they would receive a ticket.
Okay.
Lisa?
Just a clarification, so I want to make sure I understand the permit parking. If you have a permit, then you can pull your car in there between 7 and 9 a.m. Nobody else can, but if there's a spot open at 9:01, anybody can park and can leave their car there for an unlimited amount of time, or up to 72 hours.
Correct, 72 hours in public parking.
Or would it be 72 hours, or would it be 7 a.m., 6:59 a.m. the next morning?
Right.
Okay.
Unless it's Saturday or something, or a holiday.
Right. In general, in public right of way, 72 hours. Just speaking briefly on the ordinance amendments, it will, our current code is very specific. So just a snippet of that, of our current city code is quite long. It basically has very specific guidelines to every street end within town center. So with an amendment to the ordinance, it could be utilized as a code cleanup. If we were to include the Sunset Highway, it would take staff time in the city attorney's office as well as the police departments for review. This slide is our cost analysis, and I apologize about the slide. It is in your exhibit, in the agenda bill. And basically I broke it down into the 3 project sites. Even though that the BP Arco property is no longer included in this project, I did include it for comparison. And then on the bottom you'll see that the boat launch is there as well. And as a reminder, that is set to go live on January 1st.
So council, any questions? Celine?
Is there a reason that, and I'm guessing that's based on these numbers, that the East End cul-de-sac, why did you not kind of look at that and say, well, it'd be great if people park like they do in the west, capacity would have gone up?
So for my cost analysis, I'm just going off of what the current parking systems are. I haven't spoken with our internal teams about why they park the way they do. I'm assuming because the stalls are not painted on the west end and on the east end. There is signage surrounding both cul-de-sacs that say no parking east of here or west of here. So to answer your question, unless we painted stalls on both ends of the cul-de-sacs, I believe it's just historical use of both of those east and west end cul-de-sacs of how people are parking there.
We would also, I just want to add, if we were to modify the parking configuration on the east end, we would need to consult with fire. On the west end, they have another way to turn their trucks around, and so the way the cars are parking, they have said is acceptable. Does that get back to your question of, you were asking if we could go nose in on the east end as well? We would have to go back to fire. I apologize, we didn't ask the question.
So we have Benson, then Bruce, and Lisa.
I have a kind of a general question as far as, Zach, if you know, can you explain why there's a different policy, different parking program for the west end, east end, and in the middle? And I guess my follow-up question is basically if the purpose of the permit parking in the west end is to promote or to provide commuter parking, and it sounds like that may not be used as commuter parking and may be heavily used by people simply parking there after 9 a.m. And if that's the case, then why isn't that turned into like 4-hour parking to be consistent with the east end?
Councilmember Wong, I'm unsure of why the street ends are designated as that. I know that there is some historical background on that, on why the west end was designated as the town center. I believe that the east end, due to the proximity to the park and ride, I believe council, I don't know what date, wanted an area that would not be a long-term thing. It was kind of intended for someone to go park at the east end cul-de-sac, hypothetically go into Seattle for a doctor visit, and then come back if the park and ride was full.
But arguably, we could do the same for the west end if we so chose.
That's correct.
Without having to go through some of the hoops that we've discussed.
Yeah. One of the things that we had talked about sort of longer term is we do have if you look at our parking ordinance, and Zach screenshot, which is part of it, it is a patchwork quilt. There's not a lot of well, I shouldn't say that. There are inconsistencies, like Sunset Highway is a good example. So we had talked about, as we get closer to the Sound Transit Station opening, sometime before that, needing to do a parking study, or update our parking study, I should say. Look again at the town center permit parking areas and perhaps drive for consistency. I don't want to speak for the police chief, but he happens to be sitting right there, so he can chime in. I believe more consistency in our code would actually help with our parking enforcement program.
It would certainly make it easier, and I don't want to get ahead of the discussion, but at some point, and maybe when we talk more, if we step back and look at all the parking together, there could be a discussion on, does it make sense to have someone other than the city council dictate which blocks are how long for what parking? So it could be a scenario where internal staff would have the authority to, within guidelines, but have some ability to affect parking regulations without taking each specific block of the town center to the council, asking for council authority on how long should this be. So that would facilitate this. You asked Zach why this section of the parking lot or of that street was dictated to be a certain amount of time. And I think the short answer is at some point the council at the time thought that was the right mix. So it's hard for staff sometimes to respond because we weren't the one making the final decision. So again, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but that could be a discussion for the future. Who should really be making these decisions on timing?
Okay, great, thank you. So next we have Bruce and then Lisa.
Let's see, to Salim's point, first if you could go back to the picture that showed the red, purple, and blue lines. I'm not certain of this, but I don't think people are parking in the ways they're parking at random. If you look at the west end, you look at the red line at the bottom of the west end, it actually jogs south, and you have more space there. You don't at the east end. It's a tighter fit, and I think the reason people don't all go nosing at the east end is it's too small an area to actually do that. I could be wrong about that, but I think that's what's happening, yeah. So you've actually got more north to south space, and cars fit, and so they do it. To the Benson's questioner, why is it a patchwork? It's a patchwork because it got tweaked a little bit over time, at least in my time on council. You ask for a study, you hear a problem, you ask for a study, you hear from a lot of people, we need this, we need that, and you come up with a little bit of a compromise that changes things a bit. And perhaps the chief's idea of a more holistic approach to the whole thing makes sense, but I'm gonna guess that there'll be a whole lot of public input at that point too, and you don't ever get to sort of wipe the slate entirely clean and say let's have full logic, but great if we could. No questions.
Great, Lisa?
Thanks. So I think maybe Bruce answered this question, but I was going to ask, are the cul-de-sacs the same size? And I guess it may be that the west end is slightly larger. So we'll just kind of go with that. The other question that I had was on the Sunset Highway as a whole. The revenue is broken out by location. The costs and the recurring expenses are lumped together. Is there a way to break those out, or are the one-time costs the same regardless of how many locations you do, and are the recurring expenses the same regardless of whether you do 1, 2, or 3 locations?
So for this analysis, really what staff is teeing up is for Sunset Highway to cost recover, it makes sense to include all 3 portions. If we were to piecemeal the west end or the east end separately, those costs start to go up, and we would not cost recover. Let me preface it by saying, at Sunset Highway, if we include all 3 of those locations, we are estimating that it would cost recover after a year. I'm sorry, we would cost recover the one-time cost in 4 months if we include all 3 of those locations. And then the full cost recovery after a year, you would actually see more than just a cost recovery and start seeing additional revenues.
I see Wendy reaching. Okay, Wendy?
So I feel like there's a lot on our plates and a lot going on. If we put this off for a couple of months, is there any problem with that or any urgency or any delay? Like, tell me what that means if we just table this until February.
If we were to table it till February, basically everything stays the same. We are implementing at the boat launch, so if we were to bring on additional lots, the pay-by-phone, the technology provider would just charge us $250 for each additional lot. And then obviously factoring in staff time and all that, there is no major case for delaying it.
And if I could just add, Zach will maybe tell you that we rewrote this agenda bill because originally I just said I'm having concern with our priorities and the amount of time this project is taking. But I did want to bring it back to you with maybe a more neutral position to see the costs. So here's what I would tell you. There's a natural break that's going to happen in the Tully site with the tree lot happening. And we thought if we were going to start parking, it would be nice to do so in the first quarter of 2020, even though the BPRCO, or Tully site is no longer in consideration. But I need to be honest with you, council, we do have a lot on our plate. And we haven't done a hard estimate on staff hours, but it is taking time, Zach's time, my time, the chief's time, and the attorney will need to get involved with ordinance amendments as well.
And I'm also thinking about public outreach and letting people, learn about paying for parking in spaces that they're used to getting for free.
I see the chief.
Yeah, there is a piece to this that I think is worth bringing to your attention, and that is on the enforcement side of this. So the way that we are learning as we go through this process, the way most cities enforce this is through a technology called an ALPR. It's an automatic license plate reader. And so the parking enforcement officer can drive down a street or through a parking lot and automatically read license plates. And if there's an expired plate through this app, it pops up. That car is expired. We don't have one of those, and one of those is very expensive. Like the number I heard was $70,000 expensive. And so while we try this, at least at the boat launch area, what we'll have to do is just get a readout of the plates that have registered. Those that are expired apparently show up red on the phone, and we'll have to hunt for those vehicles, and we can do it, but it's just not as efficient as if you could drive down. So we can do it at the boat ramp area. What that does for us is it gives us some interaction between pay by phone and us, so we can learn something. What is this technology like? How easy is it? Is it unwieldy or is it pretty simple? And if we collectively decide to pursue pay by phone, say citywide or some variation of that, there is a companion piece to that discussion, which is the enforcement side of things. And to do it effectively, if you want to realize revenues through proactive enforcement, we would most likely need some technology to help us be efficient with that. So that's part of that. If we were to just start with the boat ramp, again, we could have some experience with pay by phone, albeit a little unwieldy because we don't have that technology. We could still do it and still get some experience. So that may be something worth considering as we think about this. These are things we have learned, Zach and I have learned along the way as we dig into this. It's like, oh, okay, we're not aware of that. So we are already learning things, and that's a pretty big thing we learned. So just some caution in rolling this out further. There's some other costs we may need to consider.
Okay. Council, there is no formal vote that is to be taken tonight. The basic direction, I think, was take information and provide direction. Zach, do you want to tell us specifically what direction it is that you need?
I will, Mayor Bertlin, I do have a couple more slides left.
I'm sorry.
Real quick, and just to follow up, there was a question last time about money flow and what that would look like. This is just a hypothetical breakdown of the daily fee and annual pass at the boat launch. Again, this is just a hypothetical of showing where that money is distributed. Basically, there's 3 pots, so on a daily fee. And again, this isn't showing the $11.25 that transaction cost would be embedded in. This is just a hypothetical again. So 25 cents would go to pay by phone. The remaining $10.75 would go would be split between Parks and Rec, which would go to the general fund, and 10% for WashDOT per the 94 airspace agreement. On the annual pass, it's the same, just a 10% distribution to WashDOT, the transaction fee, and the rest would go to Parks and Rec. So our next steps, we are seeking feedback and direction on whether we want to proceed at Sunset Highway, if it's all of Sunset Highway, if it's none of Sunset Highway, or the west, middle, or east ends.
I see Bruce.
So I haven't been thinking about for the boat launch, this annual pass, so that further complicates the enforcement then, because a person with an annual pass pulls in under this scenario, doesn't do anything with the reader, and is just exempt, or do they have to key themselves in as an annual pass?
They would display an annual pass on their
dashboard.
Yeah.
Okay, but they don't do anything. They don't do anything with their phone and their app. So from an enforcement perspective, what I'm trying to understand from an enforcement perspective, you look at this license plate and you don't have to just tie it to the pay by phone app and see are they on the list of people who recently paid today. You also have to tie it to a list of all the season pass or annual pass holders and see whether they're on that list. If you're just driving by, or get out and look at each dashboard.
So to take that question, I have been in contact with our account manager through Pay by Phone. They are reworking what they call permits, and basically in the future we will be able to, if someone buys an annual pass, whether through the app or through the community center or another avenue, their license plate would show up 24/7, so that when an enforcement officer comes in.
Vote for number 2.
Which is to suspend.
Yeah, on the Sunset Highway, go forward and vote launch, but you guys have a lot on your plates. This has got, some warts on it, so I think probably better use of your time in other places.
Okay. Any other council members want to comment? I see Dave.
Yeah, I would probably go for that. I mean, I sometimes struggle to remember the problem we're trying to solve. Is that we're trying to get more community parking, or we're trying to have some revenue, but it does feel like we're chasing $12,000 with a fairly complicated parking project on Sunset Highway, and I bet we've spent $12,000 trying to figure it out, so I would say suspend the Sunset Highway project.
Anybody else? Bruce?
I'm fine with that. I think I would suggest that in the future, when things settle down a little bit, there's going to be value in a broader parking study and deep consideration of a shift towards having folks paying for parking, even if it's a modest amount, because it'll just it'll put a cost on something that's an expensive resource, and again, to move us in a direction I think will help from a transportation perspective.
So again, go for it. That's what I said. I'm going to pull a Bruce and say I can count, but.
Yeah, no, I'll be very quick. I think I'm also in favor of number 2. I think that it behooves the city and staff to perhaps come up with a comprehensive plan similar to what the Chief Holmes discussed. I think this patchwork is confusing, and I think if the idea is to raise money, and what we see here, it doesn't pencil in as far as the amount of staff time that would be spent. I think pretty much eats away any kind of net revenue. So I'm not until we get all the issues resolved. I'm not in favor of spending more staff resources at this time.
And if I may, real quick,
Yeah.
one of the original goals of this project was to assess the technology. We will assess that technology at the boat launch. We can use our findings to extrapolate to other areas in the future if that's council's direction.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to comment, I have to be honest, I don't feel super passionately one way or the other, which I think speaks volumes in some senses that it probably isn't quite the priority that one would have hoped. I'm glad you brought up that point. It was not about generating revenue. It was about testing the technology. And to Bruce's point, I'm actually less concerned about having people pay for parking than having people understand that there's a value to parking, which means that if it's 2 to 4 hours, that means at the end you do need to move on, so that a new customer for some of the different businesses in the town center or a new light rail passenger can get on that train to go to their doctor appointment or to their performance that they have. So to me, there's more value in this in terms of creating some degree of turnover in some of our public parking rather than revenue or anything else. Of course, the other part of it is the extent to which this is the technology, this is the vendor that we would want to go further. So, I know we had public comment about council's agenda next year. At some point, whether it's next year or the following, there is, I think, definite need to be looking at town center comprehensively. I know that we have talked about it. I think it's not only where you park and how you park, but in the last week or two, I went back and revisited the Burke parking study that we went through in 2016. And one of the pieces that came out of there that I had admittedly had go to the back of my mind is that Mercer Island has smaller parking places than what a lot of the standards are. And I'm not saying that's good or bad, but I think it's important to note. And another question that came up in that context, and that is the extent to which we have the appropriate number and placement of some of our handicap parking. So as we go through some of the ADA work, that might also be an interesting piece as well. So that's a long way of saying I'm good with postponing this. Celine?
So since this has now been broadened a little bit more than this, I'm supportive of that, that's fine. I want to see a comprehensive kind of thought put on this, maybe in the town center in general. I agree about the ADA and the handicap. There's probably some optimization that can be done with that. But I will say that, it's an enforcement problem, and that's for Ed to solve. We have to optimize the space, so that goes to the east versus west end. Somebody's gonna have to get a tape out, measure it, and optimize how many spots can you get in there, right? Not just us looking at this from an aerial view, and I'm sure that would be done. It's a revenue problem. It's also a turnover problem. And so my thought is that we need to have a mechanism to force turnover of spots in town center. I've seen that done lots of different ways. One of the best ways to do it is by allying it with some other tangent function that has to occur, like street sweeping. And if we could have street sweeping on a weekly basis at town center on a set day where cars had to be removed, and if they weren't removed, they were ticketed, the street sweeper could get through, and we could be sure that the spots are turning over. I'm seeing a lot of cars occupying the same spots, and I'll just say for 72 hours, so nobody is in hot water. If they move a few feet and they're there for 72 hours, that is still occupying a spot, and that's not, in my mind, turnover. So some of these cars could get moved along if we had some systems to do that. And there was another benefit, for example, sweeping the street and cleaning up the trash and protecting the storm drains. That to me would be something that we'd look at as well.
Council, any final comments? I feel like you put a huge amount of work in and you will come back, and I think council, based on what Jesse has said, what you've said, the consensus is to, I would say, suspend this. I'm not sure I know or would make a suggestion when it would come back. There will be a new council in 2020, so I suspect that'll be an agenda item that they take up. So that, Bruce, yeah.
I have a business I'm thinking about going into now, which is making automatic license plate readers. If they sell for $70,000 and it's a camera and an app, man.
So Bruce is going to leave council and he's going to go crazy on that one. Okay, well, super.
Thank you, Council.
Thank you. Appreciate the time. With that, we now move on to other business. For that, we have the planning schedule.
Thank you, Mayor. I will point to our next council meeting is October 15th. As a reminder, I will not be here. Jason Kittner will be the acting city manager. I also wanted to mention that the Aubrey Davis Park Master Plan is scheduled up front for study session that night. You will be reviewing the draft master plan, which we will be releasing tomorrow on the Let's Talk site, so it will be out a little bit ahead of the meeting. I also have hard copies for you tonight, Council.
So we can just reiterate, that is a study session. There is no formal
Correct.
vote or anything else that's going to be occurring?
It's release of the first full draft. Thank you so much for clarifying. 5:30 to 7, we will still be taking feedback. You know, we have done a review of it. I will mention likely some things missed, typos, policy statements you'd like reframed. So that will be October 15th. Looking ahead, a reminder, the November 5th meeting is canceled. That's election day, and we're meeting on Monday, November 4th instead. I do have an item that will fall into executive session to add that evening. Council, I would like to ask if you'd prefer a 5 o'clock start or an executive session at the end.
Council, 5 o'clock? Yeah. Okay, I think we're all saying earlier.
Okay, thank you for that. And then to leap all the way ahead into 2020, we had public comment this evening about the council's planning session. I did want to point out that we have confirmed the dates of January 24th and 25th for the council planning session in 2020. We had a facilitator that we had to confirm early, so those dates are set and they are now showing in your calendar. And that is all I have on the schedule.
Okay. Are there any upcoming council member absences to report? Dave?
October 24th.
The joint school city meeting?
Correct.
Okay. Lisa?
Also possibly the 24th.
Okay, all right.
I will let you know.
Okay, and I have just a very small percentage, which I'll be confirming or just confirming in the coming days for after that Monday, November 4th. Okay, so with that, we now move on to council member reports. Let's go, we'll start with Dave.
None.
Bruce, Celine, Benson.
Just to let people know that actually the mayor and I attended on October 3 the installation of officers for the Mercer Island Lodge number 297. This is the Masons on Mercer Island. And for those who don't know, this lodge was formed in 1953, and the new officer for this coming year who will head the lodge is Scott Anderson of Mercer Island. So, again, congratulations to him.
There's a fabulous ceremony. Lisa?
Nothing.
Wendy? The only thing then that I would add in particular is on Sunday, we had the Congregational Church on Island Crest Way flip the switch on their solar panels. And this was a project that had been in the works for well over a year. They wanted me, and Wendy was there in a dual capacity, but they wanted us to definitely express their thanks and appreciation to the city staff. They said it was a great experience to be working with you as they encountered some unexpected issues along the way, but it's been an all-around positive experience. So I thank them for being a great example and a great supporter of the solar initiatives, and of course Ross Freeman, who is here, I know, was instrumental in facilitating that project. So that was a good one. And as we all know, Sunday was just an absolutely stunningly sunny day, so it seemed appropriate.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sort of taking advantage of the fact that I see Jason here. My garbage can situation is all set, but the rest of my neighborhood is kind of chaos right now. And if you could pass the word on to our pals at Recology that there are a whole lot of old cans still out there, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'd say the island-wide, there's pockets of garbage can chaos.
Can McGinn, Jason. Can McGinn.
Can Mageddon. Bin Mageddon.
Get it under control over there.
I just have to say, in my neighborhood, my neighbors are quite satisfied with the service we've had so far.
Okay.
Take the cans from the dinner.
Bring your biggies, Mercer.
I'm going to stop here. Okay, good. So with that, the City Council will now recess into executive session for approximately 2 hours to discuss pending or potential litigation with legal counsel pursuant to RCW 4230 1101I. No action